We're gonna have about 45 minutes to talk about this thing that I call brand humanizing. But before I start talking about AI and all the amazing stuff, I always prefer starting with a little bit of context. And I don't want to sound egotistical, but I have to start to talk about myself first. My name is Jonathan Flores. I'm a 29-year-old marketer with a specialty in psychology, and have been active in the tech space actually since I was studying already at my master's degree at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam here. Um, and during my studies and early in my life, I've always been really fascinated about what goes on in the human mind, what drives people, what motivates them. So that's why I took my specialty in psychology and I started learning how people actually work. Um, Started working in the tech scene, and you guys probably know how fancy these startups get nowadays when they work with AI and all this cool stuff. But what I actually did a lot was sort of abusing my knowledge. I started to actually do a couple of mind tricks because my only goal at the companies I worked for or the companies I consulted was making them money. And I honestly myself used a pretty basic algorithm for this myself. So what I did was I used my knowledge of psychology, I combined that with data, combined that with technology, and that ultimately would make a company money. That was my past. That is something I did for quite a while. And I must say that I actually had this sort of tunnel vision, right? I mean, the algorithm I used for myself for my work was quite simplistic. And it led me to focus on only one thing, and it was making money for other companies. And actually, in a while, I started to feel sort of like a robot, right? Because a robot, and especially if we talk about AI and machine learning, if you train a robot to become really good at a certain goal, it will crush it. And I have a great example for that. This guy over here, this is Lee Sedol. It is a Korean player of a game called Go. Do you guys know that? Well, there's also a great documentary on Netflix about that. But for those who don't exactly know how that documentary went, this guy is actually the world champion in this game, Go. And Go is a special game. It's a special board game that has been around for a very long time. They actually say it's the most ancient board game that we still use today. And what is so fascinating about this board game is that it's quite hard to crush for an AI. It's quite hard for an AI to beat a human being at this game because of this simple fact. This looks like a string of random numbers, but it's actually a single number. These are the amount of positions a single player can take in a single game of Go, which means that Go is quite a complex board game, and it also requires some creativity, which is a characteristic that is not always really appropriated to AI. So a lot of AI professionals saw this as the opportunity to show that AI is able to be better than a human being. So they trained the program. It was AlphaGo that actually competed with Lee Sedol in a real match. And this is how this guy ended up. He was not used to losing, and he got crushed by this AI. And that's because of the fact that, and I'm going back to this slide, the tunnel vision slide, if you program an AI to become really good at a single thing, it will become the best at it. But I, as a human being, also work like this, right? I had this singular focus in my work, and I was unable to look behind that. When I was sitting behind my computer and working on my mind games, I only saw this, right? I saw data points. I saw Google Analytics. I saw what was driving money within different advertising platforms. And what I failed to understand is that these data points are actual human beings. It is weird, I know. I mean, somebody's paying, right? But I sort of was able to dehumanize everything that I did because I only saw data. And I did all sorts of things, believe me. I spied on them. I mean, Google Analytics is nothing. I created recordings of the way that people go on a website with their mouse. I know what they looked at. And I collected all that data. I started doing some crazy experiments with them. And I'm from an academic perspective, and I've always learned that if you want to do an experiment, there is some ethics that goes on with that. I performed experiments with users that did not know that they were in an experiment, which in an academic setting is the worst thing that you can do. And I used all of that to sort of manipulate users, right? Because I understood them so well, and because I could leverage the power of algorithms, I was actually able to probably make them make some decisions that they wouldn't have done if I hadn't intervened. So I realized that I was the actual real-life human embodiment of Dr. Evil. Yeah, that was me. I mean, I have to say sorry to all of you guys, because you might have been some of the guys I influenced through my online activities, but I actually understood this after a while, and that was the first time that in a long time I made a move that distinguishes me as a human being from an AI, right? I was able to step away, and I was able to ask myself, hey, I'm probably really good at this thing, but is it even good, right? Is it ethical what I'm doing? I was able to ask myself these types of questions. And an AI will never do that. Why should it, right? We program it to be really good at the single goal, and it will execute it, and it will become the best thing to ever do it. But when I myself looked at my own algorithm that I used for myself, I saw some flaws. I thought, actually, like, something has to change. And I quickly want to go through a couple of real-life examples that can show the danger of automation, firstly, and later on also AI, if we use it inappropriately. So I want to talk about a story of my dear friend who recently moved to a new house with his girlfriend. They're very happy, and they needed to get a new energy provider. So they went on this website of one of the largest energy providers here in the Netherlands, and you have to do some sort of calculation based on how many people are living in your household and how much you think you're gonna, how much energy you think you're gonna use, and then this simple algorithm will sort of compute a monthly budget that you'll have to pay. So he did that. And he found out that this suggested budget was kind of steep, and he didn't really feel like it. So he was like, I'm going to contact these guys and just ask them, is this a fixed budget, or can I actually change this amount later on? So I have a sort of a screenshot that I translated for you guys of the actual conversation that he had. It's not so long. So this was my friend. He asked through the chat, okay, I want to become a new client. Great. The automated proposed monthly fee is $185 a month. Is this amount fixed, or can I change this later on? Seems pretty simple. So now the awesome energy company digital assistant came to the rescue, of course. And he answered, thanks for your question. Unfortunately, your question is too long for me to formulate an appropriate answer. Could you provide a shorter answer? And didn't stop there. It actually told him, preferably keywords. Right? Could you drop some keywords at me? And my friend tried all kinds of stuff, but the chatbot came back all the time with the same stupid answer that was unable to understand what it was being asked. Who's actually a fan of chatbots over here? Can I get some hands? No hands? Well, okay. That's good. I am a fan of chatbots on specific places. If you have a really straightforward question that has a factual, straight answer to, a chatbot can probably provide a better experience than a human being. But in this specific example, it does not. And it actually starts to become quite stupid. And this is a thing that goes on every day, right? It's quite annoying. But now I want to get in a different example that shows how AI can actually be not only annoying, but sometimes even quite immoral. So this is the beautiful city. Well, beautiful, it's quite artificial, but it's Las Vegas. Disneyland for adults. Let's say you want to advertise flight tickets to Las Vegas. And a lot of companies would use Facebook for that, because Facebook probably has the best advertising platform out there because it has the most data. If you're going to post this on Facebook, and I've done this a million times as a marketer myself, you basically ask the algorithm, you give it some sort of baseline information. If you have previous customers, you can even upload their email addresses to Facebook so it can sort of look for the connected accounts. And Facebook can also, of course, always start with a baseline of its previously run ads by other companies. So it has the best data and it knows the most about people. And the thing that you ask as a marketer on Facebook, you only ask the algorithm, hey, I want to sell this product and I want you to find users that are most likely to buy. That's it. Then you click a button and your work stops. The algorithm takes over. And the algorithm itself is going to make decisions that we don't understand or even know what kind of decision he made or why. So an algorithm is going to look for people that are probably most likely to buy this. And it ends up, and a couple of people have done some research about this, that the algorithm can actually start to optimize for people that are gambling addicts or alcoholics, which is probably a really bad idea, but the algorithm doesn't know that those people are alcoholics or gambling addicts. The algorithm does exactly what we told it to do, and it was find people who are going to buy these flights. And that's quite insane. And another example is an Amazon one, and it actually started with a lot of good intentions. So what Amazon wanted to do, they actually found out that in the recruiting process, especially at the beginning, when they had to select surveys, they found out that they selected mostly men. They're like, okay, this is a human bias. What if we create an algorithm for this that can make the first selection so we can sort of get rid of our own biases? Well, that's a great idea to start from. So what do? You are going to take some of your past CVs that you received. You're going to label them good and bad. You're going to put that in the machine, and the machine will start to learn from your past hires. And you can already probably guess what is going to happen. Most of the past hires were men. So eventually, this algorithm is going to optimize for men, and it did, because they tested it with it for a while. And it optimized it so much that in the end, it did not throw out any female CVs anymore, only male CVs. Because the algorithm was able to distinguish that most men that got into there were successful. And I must tell you that they actually stripped all the CVs from gender identifiers. So there were no pictures, there were no names on there, there was no sort of thing that said gender. No, the algorithm figured it out itself because it's going to look for patterns that are useless to us human beings. So why does this all happen? In AI, basically runs on these two types of things. And that is historical data, and it needs a definition of success. That's it. But if you look at historical data, it sees the thing on the left, and it does not know what the thing on the right is. Just as the example that I gave, when I was working myself with my simple algorithm, I was looking at that, I wasn't looking at people. And the problem is, if we talk about historical data is basically the result of things that we have been doing ourselves as human beings, and we are biased, so the historical data is also biased. So algorithms, even though they are objective, we've taught them to operate and optimize based on our own assumptions and our own biases. And the definition of success is, of course, you tell the algorithm what the algorithm should optimize for. So in the case of flight tickets to Las Vegas, it's going to look for people that are likely to buy flight tickets to Las Vegas. And for the Amazon example, it is going to look for good CVs. And another problem, and especially with the Amazon example, we saw that it's starting to create its own feedback. Because when it got into a loop and it has met this definition of success, right? It started to understand, hey, this is a good CV for me, this is a bad CV for me. Those results, he put it back into his own data, which means that the algorithm is sort of polluting itself and making worse what we as human beings actually wanted to prevent from happening. And then there's the proxy problem, and this is quite statistical, but basically a proxy is a variable that can, to a large extent, really estimate a different, perhaps unrelated variable. So within the Facebook algorithm, it was the algorithm was able to sort of understand what types of variables people had in common, and if they met those criteria, unknowingly, they were gambling addicts. And these are really stupid data, such as amount of time spent looking at a certain picture, clicks on a certain ad, likes on a certain page, amount of friends, amount of time spent on the platform. It can also, because it knows where you are. So let's say that you have been to the AA facilities. It will also start to use that type of data. We don't know what it's going to use, but it's going to look for similarities between people that are most likely to buy flight tickets to Las Vegas. And with Amazon, they found out that the usage of certain words on a CV were actually quite predictable for the gender of the person. So even though they stripped these CVs of gender identifiers, the algorithm itself was still able to find out unknowingly who are male and who are female. And ultimately, sometimes we're just simply asking robots to perform tasks they are unequipped to do. Because humans and robots are different, right? This is part of a really long essay or article that I wrote about with my dear friend Ferry Hoes on brain humanizing. And that specific article is really tailored at business people. But the reason I wanted to come to the the Dutch PHP conference is I also wanted to address people that are really at the source of this. I'm not a coder, but most of you guys probably are. And it is always these business leaders that come up with these ideas, but it is ultimately you guys who we business people need in order to realize whatever we want. And that's why I wanted to come here to also explain to you guys what can go on after an algorithm has been created. And this is a very, very interesting thing to understand, that a robot has certain skills that a human doesn't have, and vice versa. So they're not the same thing. And that's actually quite okay. With brain humanizing, the basic idea is that if man and robot meet together in their own strength, they can do some awesome things. And I also want to show some examples of that, because it's not that AI is all bad. No, it's pretty effing awesome. Who remembers this image? We have probably everyone. This is, of course, the image of the black hole, the first one ever to be created, and it is actually something that should be impossible for us. If I understood it correctly, we would need a telescope the size of the Earth normally to be able to create this image. But we did something that we humans are really good at. We got creative under specific constructs. And we created things, technology, that can actually help us do things that we previously couldn't. So they bundled 8 of the largest telescopes on the world to work simultaneously. They automated the entire process, wrote terrific code for that, so they can at all times observe the event horizon of the black hole. And then there was this space hero to me who led the program that created the algorithm that was able to use petabytes of this data and compute an image from that. And how awesome is that? That we can actually use your skills together with like human qualities to create epic things like this. I mean, I feel that this should be our future. This should be the future of our world. This should be the future on how we use technology. Not to exploit us, not to extract insane amount of money or to become, I don't know, like these monopoly giant tech companies that live off of people. But no, let's create value and let's create situations that we previously, simply because of our own technical inabilities, were unable to do. And another really cool example I got is of a hospital in Paris, the St. Joseph Hospital. And they also started to realize this, that hey, probably we can use some of this technology to do some awesome things. They used automation to take over repetitive administrative tasks that a lot of nurses have to do. And now a robot does that, most of it. And that frees up these nurses to actually spend time on caring for their patients, which is ultimately their job. But now with technology, we can actually free up those human beings from things they're just probably less good at than robots to do awesome things. And they also created different apps so they could enable human interaction before and even after a hospitalization. And another cool thing that they did, they used AI. And they mostly used AI for people that are on heavy medicals, that use different types of drugs and have been using that for a couple of years. And what can happen is that there's always a danger of sort of cross-contamination, that a certain medical pill does not work with another one or whatever. So they now are using algorithms to just do that job, right? Because a human being, and especially doctors who have been working for a very long time, and I know this from a psychological perspective, become really bad at things like this when they're tired. An algorithm will never do that. And an algorithm is not going to endanger people because it is being given really objective data, right? We know that certain medicines don't work together, etc. And it makes a decision and it informs the doctor, who can then still use his human qualities to check it and then go on with it. But it saves a lot of time. And now the doctor can spend that time to talk to the patient, actually explain how to use this new medicine, how to use this new drug. And that is some really cool stuff. So ultimately, where I want to go at with this presentation is to explain that psychology, data, technology, they're actually superpowers. And a superpower is like this exceptional ability to do great things, but you can use it for either good or evil. And this metaphor, I'm actually talking about you guys, right? The fact that you can write such great code, that you can do these awesome things, means that you have a choice on how you're going to use it. And yeah, you could be either one of these guys, basically. So what I want to say is that our future right, is not predefined. I know that a lot of people are saying in the future AI is going to take over everything, like we humans are useless, but that's not predefined. It's a choice. And it's up to us, the people within the tech industry, you guys, the coders, me, the marketing or business guy that works in the tech scene, to together make the correct choice. So I want to end this presentation with the question, what do you choose? And I reserved the last 15 minutes, if you have, for some Q&A, because I know that we can often get into some really interesting conversations. So, do you have any questions? Yes, you there.
What about the law, like collecting data and using it, and like the resumes from Amazon?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like personal data.
Yeah.
And is there something in the law defined that you can use, or do you have to like accept some terms, or
Okay.
what's the
I'm going to repeat your question, not because nobody heard it, but this is also being recorded, and I've been told to repeat the question. So if I understand correctly, you asked the question about, hey, how does law fit into this? You're recording all this personal data. What do we do? Well, that's, I think, a really, really good question. And we see different approaches to that in the entire world. Right now, I think there are three major streams. We have the European look, we have the American look, and there's the Chinese look. And the latter one in China, it seems that people are actually quite okay with all of their data being used, and I don't even know if the government nor the tech companies actually really care about it. So the largest privacy issues would, in my opinion, be in China. Europe is at the far opposite. We are actually quite well regulated from law. It's not really always being correctly governed yet, but the law is at the side of the consumer, at the side of the user, and the United States is somewhere in between. But why I actually started this brand humanizing thing is that I understood that we can make great changes with great regulation. But regulation requires people that have knowledge, requires the right people to be chosen in the right positions, and it requires laws to be passed. And there are a lot of ifs and buts associated to that. And when I realized that this future was happening, I was like, okay, there's two ways to make a change, and that is through government. And I was like, okay, let's let government be itself, but it's also through the market. And the article that I wrote is focused on businesses, and it actually, I showed them how a company can make more money by actually behaving as a human being, as a good person. So what I hope to do is that the government does its own thing, because that is going on, but it's going to take a while for actually laws to be created, and then even if they're created, to be governed well. But if I can let companies understand that they can make more money by behaving as a good boy, then that's another track I can do. And that's the track that I chose for myself, which I probably feel that I can influence, because I'm used to talking to those guys, and I know that they will walk in whichever way that is making more money. So by restructuring a company in such a way, I try to show that they can, that they're leaving a lot of money on the table by not behaving how they could. But ultimately, that is also really good for us, for a consumer, but also for employees, because I feel like sometimes employees are being treated as robots, or are being replaced without any other idea, right? And some cool examples on that are, for example, a person that works at a call center. These people are given a script, right? And they are told basically to act like a robot. And I don't honestly say if you want robots, then you probably should have robots sitting behind the behind the telephone. If you have a human being, it's okay to have a script, to have some guidelines, but let the human being actually use its human capabilities to provide service to a client. And another thing is that companies are often using automation and AI to get rid of people, but it is really based on a idea of cost reduction, right, and efficiency. And what I say is that companies should actually change that mindset, should change their minds, should shift their minds to seeing that as an opportunity to now use these human beings that have probably been working in a roboticized type of work, to now use them to work on creating relationships. Because something that we have lost somewhere in the past was this human interaction. And if we look at an economy is still based on the interaction between one human and another, and there's a transaction somewhere in the middle. And we've been starting to use a lot of technology to facilitate this process. But the underlying premises did not change. It is not a robot who is selling a product to another robot. Robots don't have money and don't have any desire to buy any products. In the end of the day, it's still human beings. So we should get back to that perhaps old school mentality to start to create relationships again. And we couldn't because we still needed to use a lot of human beings on processes that we could not yet automate, or that we could not yet create algorithms for. But now we can, and now we should start to change that thing. And I think that the example I gave of the hospital is a very good one, right? People had to, like in the years, start to do much more administrative tasks. They had to actually, for some reason, had to spend less time with their patients because they had to do so many things, which is weird to me because they're there for their patients, right? But they had to do tasks that actually should fit robots, and now we can do that. So I believe that government is a really good thing to do, right? But the market can move today, and it probably will once it understands that it can make more money. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
Maybe more like a remark. There's a person called Richard Sennett, and he thought about robots and machines too. He does that from a point of view a little bit back in time where AI and robots were not such a big thing, but he distincts machines in general in two other categories, which is very interesting. One is the replicant, replicating what a human is doing.
Mm.
Then there are the robots, which are like more over human sized. So they can do things 1,000 times that we can do, and it brings the example of the iPod, which can remember more songs than we can do. The hardest version probably. So what I observed is that robots, we have more these robotish things, and we don't have our eyes on the replicant things, which is a word he draws from the science fiction movie Blade Runner, basically. So when I look at your lists, the green-red lists, there are some things that are tackled right now, and I have to tell you that the median Hollywood movie, even if it's Avengers, has a relatively static plot that can be generated out of user interest, and all this is really, there are a lot of experiments going on in the arts and science. We talked about making music, and there are experiments from people who create music, basically reading the charts and creating new track basics. I've seen the software, it's really far advanced. So what I want to say, we will see this shift from robots to replicant robots, and now we have the time where it mixes up and you can't do the distinction anymore.
Yeah.
Very soon this will happen. It will be borderline scary, but the list as you showed it will not be the same in 2 years.
Well, I'm gonna answer your question as well, and first have to repeat it again. Like no, so I hope nobody understood what he said. So I'm gonna no. But for the listeners out there that are gonna listen to this in the future, you stated that there are two categories of robots: the replicants, who basically mimic humans but are quite limited, and the robots that are sort of a superhuman that can do things a million times better than human beings. And you also stated examples such as robots can make art and create music and stuff like that, right?
It goes into this direction.
Yeah, it goes into that right direction.
Yeah.
And I know about that. I know that algorithms can sometimes even be sort of more not really more empathetic, but they can understand. They can see fear. They can base, for example, on facial characteristics that we humans sometimes it's really hard for us to understand because they can see patterns that we cannot. I've heard examples of sort of these doctor robots that interview a patient, and the patient is actually more honest to the robot than to another human being because it does not feel any shame for the robot because the robot will not think anything. So yes, there's going to be robots that can do a couple of the things on the list probably better than human beings, perhaps. But being better at one of those characteristics does not mean that they're still replacing human beings, because there's always this one thing that will distinguish a robot from a human being, and that is our mortality, basically. A robot does not feel fear. A robot does not feel empathy. It can learn to mimic empathetic behaviors. It can execute what we want it to do, but it will not feel it, right? If, let's say, I'm in an interaction with a company and I have a robot that throws a lot of empathy to me, right? It perfectly understands me. It tells me that he's sorry a million times, etc., etc. In the end of the day, I know that it is a robot that does not feel anything. It has been taught, it's been programmed to feel. And this human connection, and that is why I told you guys that the basis of an economy is this connection between two human beings, is it cannot be replicated. We can replicate the way that a human does. We can make this robot better at certain perspectives than a human being, but a robot is not a human being, right? They're two different things. So that is why my vision on that specific topic is still different, because I know that these experiments are going on, and I know that an algorithms can do some of these characteristics that we ascribe to human beings, but the thing that is different there is the sincerity, right? A human being can be sincere. A robot can just do whatever we told it to do. And that is still and will always be a great distinction, I believe. We still have 5 minutes. So do you have any other questions? Yeah.
I work for a psychology agency.
Yeah.
We assess people, and some of the things we do, I'm highly skeptical if this is the right thing in terms of adding technology into the process. Is there anything you could recommend me to read so that I'm better equipped to talk to those people?
Definitely. Well, I think one of the best books I can think of if we talk about algorithms and the danger of AI is called a book, Weapons of Math Destruction. So of mathematics. And then there's also this great book called AI Superpowers, which in the beginning starts to talk about the differences between the United States and China with regards to AI. But later on in the book, we'll really get to the core of AI. We'll start to talk about AGI and ASI, so artificial generalized intelligence, which is something that we are unable to do yet. But we believe that we may do something. So that's an AI that couldn't do everything, basically. But especially at this moment, we have more of ASI, which is artificial specialized intelligence. And the guy who wrote it is a serial investor, VC, who's also a coder who has worked at Apple, Microsoft as well, and has been active in this space for I don't know since when. So he's really well equipped to also explain what he does. And I'm not going to 5 minutes. I'm not going to ruin the plot of the book, but it will start going somewhere more human at the end of the book, which is cool because he actually faces some situation. And thirdly, you should read my article, of course. It's AI superpowers. Yeah. In my article, probably right now, if you Google brand humanizing, it will be the top result. And on DuckDuckGo, if you are more into privacy, which I encourage, you'd have to look, you just add medium to it and you'll find it. You're welcome. Any other questions? Final shot. There's 3 minutes left. Make use of this time. It's the last day. No. Well, if you don't have any questions anymore, I just like to thank you guys for coming. For me, I did not know how this talk was going to go because I'm used to giving presentations, but always to like these tech business guys, and I understand their language. But I thought this was such a great opportunity to actually present this to the guys that are at the very source of all the beautiful technology that is coming. I applaud you guys. I'm so happy that we have people like you. I wish I could code like you guys do, but I have different qualities, I should say. So I want to hand out an applause to you guys and thank you for what you've done for us up to now. And I hope that my talk will also make you think about what you're doing and what you can actually do with this superpower that all of you guys have. You can do amazing things for us, and I hope that you guys would work more with other business people and use technology at the right places to make human lives become more extraordinary than they already are. So thank you a lot for coming.